Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Amy uses Oko to turn her Altar of the Pantheon into an elk. She has no other relevant permanents. What is her devotion to green after she does this? Okay, so I think any sane person would look at this question and say that the answer is obviously 1. She has 1 green mana symbol in Oko's cost, and the Altar of the Pantheon lost all its abilities, so that isn't increasing everything by 1 anymore, right? Right? Well, if that was all there is to it, I don't think that I could get away with rating this as a 4-star question. So what's the catch? Longtime fans of the channel might already know that if you use Oko or any similar effect to take away the abilities of a card like Magus of the Moon, that doesn't actually do what you think it should, because of how theirs work. Type-changing effects like Magus of the Moons apply before effects that make something gain or lose abilities. So that means that non-basic lands would stay being mountains even after the Magus of the Moon has been turned into an elk. We have a similar layers-based shenanigans going on in the question from the original problem statement, because, as you can see here in this rule, devotion is calculated after copy, control, and text-changing effects are applied, but before any other type of continuous effects, for example, the ones that make you gain or lose abilities. Accordingly, the Altar of the Pantheon will still function even after it loses all its abilities. Pretty cool, right? And that's all I have for you today. Okay, just kidding. There's no way that I could just give that answer and not even attempt to explain why this rule exists or some of the technical considerations that went into it. Regarding the first point, let's consider what the alternatives would be. Imagine for a sec that you are Wizards of the Coast and you need to write some rules for how devotion works. When should the game calculate it? Well, if you're like me, the most natural answer to that question would be sometime after all continuous effects are applied. That way, if a continuous effect wanted to modify a permanent's characteristics in a way that affected how much devotion that permanent contributed, such a change would be taken into account. Unfortunately, there's a problem. Consider how the altar would work if you had this Nylea. I'm pretty sure that everyone thinks that if you had 4 devotion to green normally, and then you play the Altar of the Pantheon, that should mean that your Nylea becomes a creature. But the thing that makes Nylea not a creature is a continuous effect. If we want the answer for this question to be what we all just agreed that it should be, we need to be able to apply the Altar of the Pantheon sometime before that continuous effect happens, which is in layer 4. Well, probably the next most logical time to calculate devotion would be sometime before continuous effects are applied. This neatly solves the issue from before, but at the expense of some new problems. First of all, like what we were talking about before, any continuous effects that change the devotion that a permanent provides would not be taken into account. That would mean that a clone would always be providing 1 devotion to blue, no matter what it was copying. Second, if you were to use something like a control magic to gain control of a permanent, guess how that happens? Yeah, that's a continuous effect also. It happens in layer 2. If devotion was calculated before any continuous effects applied, then that would mean that even if your Primal Crux got stolen, it would still be contributing towards your devotion to green. And so we end up in this unfortunate spot where in order to make things work out the way we want, devotion has to get calculated sometime after layer 2 and before layer 4. As you already saw, that's exactly how it works in the rules. It gets calculated in between layers 3 and 4. And this was probably done because text-changing effects happen in layer 3. And there's a certain high-profile text-changing effect, namely Volrath's Shapeshifter, which had to be a text-changing effect rather than a copy effect because that way it gets applied after control-changing effects. So it always looks at the correct person's graveyard. Unfortunately, this really is supposed to be a copy effect, so it works just like them, including the part where it changes the mana symbols in Volrath's Shapeshifter's mana cost, even though that is not text by any reasonable definition of the word. So I think that's why the decision was made to make text changes applied before devotion gets calculated. And another consequence of this choice would be that if you animated the Altar of the Pantheon and then used exchange of words to exchange its text box with something like a grizzly bear's, then that would result in the Altar of the Pantheon not having any abilities. But because we're accomplishing this via a text-changing effect this time, that actually happens before devotion is calculated, meaning that unlike with the situation from the original problem statement, you actually get the expected result of Altar of the Pantheon not affecting devotion, although the formerly ability-less creature that got its text box would. Now, I get the feeling that stuff like this is what people are thinking about when they say continuous effects are hard. And yeah, I get it. They're a kludgy mess. Hopefully with this, it at least makes a little bit more sense why it's as complicated as it is. In spite of the weird stuff like this, the continuous effects system that we have right now does actually give the most reasonable answer the vast majority of the time. So much so that the times when it fails, like this one, look particularly egregious. Now, I actually got the idea for this question while doing research for a question that a viewer sent in, asking whether making a red creature into an elk with Oko would affect your devotion, since that changes the color to green. Well, serendipitously, I think that this question is a great cap on today's episode, since we can actually use the concepts we were talking about to answer it, rather than just giving the standard answer that changing the color does not change the mana symbols, and therefore it does not affect your devotion at all. Recall that color changing effects are applied in layer 5. Now, since devotion is calculated in between layers 3 and 4, that means that even if changing an object's color also changed the symbols in its mana cost, it would not be able to change the devotion because it happens too late. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.